My name's Amy Miller, Amy Chasteen Miller, and you can see it up there. I'm the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs in the College of Arts and Letters. So some of you I know are new Arts and Letters faculty, yes? You'll be seeing a good bit of me. Oh, there you go. But some of the rest of you will be seeing a good bit of me too, I'm sure, because I've been on campus for 16 years. So I was having some sort of flashbacks today. I went to the luncheon with all of y'all and remembering I was saying to Dr. Wiesenberg, it doesn't seem that long ago that I came in 16 years, and I remember sitting there, and no offense to any HR people in the room, but long talks about benefits, and I was just glazing over by the end of the day, and I noticed I think, the last thing on your agenda. So I'll try to make it interesting and kind of not too painful, but Dr. Wiesenberg asked me to come today just to give y'all some tips for your first year. And I have been teaching here for a very long time. I just moved to the office of the Associate Dean last month. So I was 16 years in anthropology and sociology, and I've taught sociology that entire time. And the sociology program here is an undergraduate only program. So I taught classes of 30 people at the smallest, 25 on a really unusual semester, up to 145. And what Dr. Wiesenberg said about the spectrum of students is right. It really is the most challenging thing about teaching at Southern Miss, and I just wanted to reiterate that. It's one thing, I know you all are hearing that, and you're saying, yes, I'm familiar with this if you've been in another institution, but it really is different here, and it's really remarkable the span of student preparation, the span of student engagement, the span of student interest. You have from the very, very best students you can imagine to students who are really, really struggling with the most basic things. So if you go in knowing that's coming, it will affect how you teach, I think, and give you a bit of a leg up on that beginning of the semester. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I just wanted to reiterate that as Dr. Wiesenberg brought it up. So he asked me to talk about top 10 things, and this was a real challenge. So I talked to all the faculty and deans and everybody I could think of, and especially the newer faculty, to say, what did you wish you knew when you first got here? And everybody said, oh, lots and lots of things. But it's hard to actually pin it down to 10. So you might see that these are 10, but some of them may include subtopics. So it's a little bit extra. Okay, so I did it in reverse order. So we'll start with number 10. And they're not really in order of priority, but kind of sort of are. Number 1, create a detailed, thorough syllabus. How many of y'all have taught prior to this appointment? Wow, okay, so most of y'all. So this is old news for y'all. It is one of those things that is an incredible investment of time before the semester starts, but it is a huge time saver later. The longer I've taught, the more time I spend on the syllabus construction, because it becomes the thing you can go to throughout the semester to save your time later. If you know already before the term starts what you're teaching, what you're assigning, all the readings, all the details, it just saves you so much time as the semester unfolds. So I know the temptation starting a new job is just to throw together a really quick syllabus that's very minimalist, that just has maybe topics in order. I've seen them with no dates. Now, this does not help you, this does not help the students, and it can actually make things more difficult later when the students, if they have a complaint or have an issue. It's just the best thing for you and the best thing for the students if you lay everything out. And it's always a good idea to ask other faculty in your department who've been teaching here to show you their syllabi. Even if it's not the exact class that you're going to be teaching, you can take things from how they set it up, the tone of the syllabus, how much material they cover, and kind of mimic that in your own syllabus creation. So I would encourage you to talk to people and, of course, talk to them about lots of things, but one thing is to get copies of their syllabus. And if you're teaching a standard course, you can certainly duplicate a lot of what they do and not have to recreate the wheels. So have those conversations and work on that syllabus and spend a lot of time on it now and save yourself pain later. Number 9, don't worry, Dr. Wiesenberg, I do take teaching seriously. So I say don't take your teaching too seriously, but I mean that in a very specific way. I think it's really easy, especially if you haven't been teaching for very long, and I've been teaching for over 20 years, just 16 here. When I first started, I was so serious about it. I was so nervous about it, and I would get sweaty palms, and I would go in the classroom, and I would think, oh gosh, Sociology 101, it's a lot. I have so much to cover, and I only have 16 weeks, and I have to cover everything. And I would get so stressed out that I would go in the class, and I would kind of lose perspective of why I was doing this and what I loved about the discipline. And one day it just kind of hit me that I like teaching. Teaching is fun for me, and I need to let the students see what it is about the subject that I love. I need to go in there with a different attitude instead of like a grind, like I've got to get through this, I've got to get through this. To go in and just say, let's have fun with it. And I'll tell you that the longer I teach, the less I teach. The more times I've taught, say, Sociology 101, our basic course, the fewer subjects I've covered. The more I've erred and gone towards depth rather than breadth. And the reason is that I start thinking about it and I start thinking, what do I really want the students to get when I bump into them 5 years from now? And that's happened now. I bump into them 15 years later and they tell me what they remember from my classes. And some of you probably already had that experience. And they don't remember those details you spent a lot of time worrying about getting in your lecture. You know, they remember the main general framework, the points, the questions, the perspective. And once I started realizing that, and most of our students in those basic courses aren't going to take a lot more in your discipline, I started really trying to spend more time on getting them to appreciate and love the discipline. And then if they did, they would take more classes and we could get into more depth. But I think having that kind of attitude of fun can help be contagious for the students. And they start seeing the class as being something to look forward to rather than something that's going to be torturous. And y'all had torturous classes, I imagine, when you were in school. I know that I certainly did. And a lot of times the difficult classes could also be the fun classes. So don't misread that I want you to make it easy. And I want you to set the bar high, but I want you to go in and try to the extent that you're able to be lighthearted about it and just to enjoy the time that you're there, which is really hard to do, I know, when you're starting in a new job. Number 8, get involved in service, but not too involved. Okay? Be active and helpful in your department, stay involved in the profession, and agree to small service obligations. But you really can be chairing multiple committees and president of faculty senate after you get tenure. And you all know this, and you know this, but you may not really have taken that in and what that means. One of the things I love about Southern Miss is that we are a culture of service. I enjoy serving this university. I enjoy serving my department and my profession. But the temptation, especially when you first get here, is when people ask you to do something to kind of feel like you can't say no. And next thing you know, it's the end of your first year and you are way overextended in service. And this cannot be priority number 1 or priority number 2. Probably not even priority number 3. We want you to serve, but be really, really careful and selective about the service you say yes to. I would encourage you to talk to your department chairs and say, you know, I need to clarify and I want to make sure I have a really good understanding of the service obligations you expect from me and what really is the best way that I can help the department. Because obviously you want to be a team player, but I've seen so many assistant professors come in and get really overwhelmed with service, and that will cause you stumbling blocks when it comes to tenure and promotion because you get behind on your research. And I'm telling you, it is really, really easy to do. And part of it is because you're going to see other people getting involved and really enjoying it and, you know, being able to contribute, because this university is a place where you can make a difference. If you have a great idea and you want to do something, I mean, I've come up with ideas since I've been here and really dedicated an enormous amount of time to building new things that I thought would matter and would help students. And it was really rewarding, but I did too much of it before I was tenured, and it made it a lot harder. And I've seen more people do that than not. So I just want to warn you a little bit at the onset to be proactive in thinking about your service. You know, definitely stay involved with your profession because too many people let that go. You know, review manuscripts, not too many. Join organizations and be active, not too many. And obviously in your department is essential. But then talk to your department chair about what else is expected, what else would be good, and what you can say no to. I know the junior faculty in my department, I was department chair the past 4 years, I would tell them, come see me before you say yes to anything. First of all, it'll buy you time. Because if somebody asks you, you can say, my department chair wants me to check with her first before I agree to anything else. And so then it's kind of, you're not the bad guy, and then she would, you know, they would come see me and I would say, okay, what do you have so far? I'm afraid you're going to have to say no, and you could say your department's chair said you had to say no. So it was a win-win for her on some level. You know, there's one new faculty member in particular I'm thinking of. So I definitely would encourage you to have that conversation with your department chair, and I'm betting that almost all the time the chairs will say, yes, be careful about your service. Let's see if I get number 7. Okay, protect your time. I'm a bit of an organization freak. Not everybody is, but it's a good thing to do when it comes to your time. Again, planning ahead. You're going to have a hard time juggling teaching, research, and service. You know that already. I'm a big fan of calendars and schedules and blocking time out that I keep sacred and do not let other things interfere with it. Your research time for most people is your time where it's just for you on some level, that you're not working alongside other people most of the time as you're starting your research agenda and getting it going. So you'll have someone say, oh gosh, can you do this? Or can you meet with me? A student asks, or could you be on this committee? And next thing you know, you've agreed to sacrifice that time you'd planned to write that paper. Don't do it. Go ahead now and say, Thursdays, no appointments, or every morning before 10:30, no appointments, or whatever you have to do to safeguard that time. And really, unless it's something extremely important, do not compromise that, because that's what you really have to do in order to maintain that trajectory. Now, what I like to do is just set aside specific time for teaching, grading, prep, etc., and specific time for research, and then keep most of the week a little bit flexible so I can do whatever needs to be done. But if you know that and you tell people that, your students, your colleagues, it really will protect your time. It may mean getting out of the office. We have carols in the library that I used a lot when I was untenured, to go and hide in there. They don't have phones, and I would think, well, you shouldn't use your phone in the library, so I wouldn't have mine. And it was a way to just disappear for a few hours and really crank out some work. So think about your own strategy before the semester starts, because next thing you know, it will be November, and the semester's gone, and you don't know what happened, and you forgot to set aside time for research. So the more you can think about it now, the better. Schedules are your friends. Don't work all the time, and don't feel guilty. How many of y'all are still suffering from the grad school malaise of, gosh, it's 11:30 at night and I'm awake, therefore I should be working on a paper? Is my dissertation done yet? I better get on it. I still feel that way 20 years later. It's really tough. And the faculty life is just more of the same. I mean, you don't want to do this the rest of your life. You have to give yourself permission to recuperate and rest and totally unplug from work. Do not feel guilty about going on a vacation. Faculty are like, oh gosh, I'm taking 2 days to go to the beach, but geez, I really need to be working on that paper. Or God forbid, you take it with you to Gulf Shores or whatever. Don't do it. Go out to eat. Go have cocktails with your friends. Go see movies. Don't do it every day and every night, but set aside time every week to take care of yourself and work out. Do things that make you okay, because sanity matters too. And you know this, right? This is what you would tell your students, is that if you just work all the time, you become less efficient. And I do this now. I tend to overwork, so this is the way I have to talk to myself too. You have to unplug. At least one day a week, pretend you don't have a job and do nothing associated with work. And I promise you'll be a lot more efficient. And you may have family, friends, people you want to spend time with. Do that, okay? I absolve you of all guilt that you have that is hanging over your head from graduate school. I give you permission to let it all go and have fun. And don't feel guilty, don't be embarrassed. Don't run around the office talking about how much you went out every single night. That's not a good idea either. But just quietly take care of yourself and have a good time. It's important to keep things in balance. Listen. An obvious fact and an obvious tip, but one that sometimes, again, bears repeating. Listen a lot your first year. You are walking into new terrain, most of you. I do see some familiar faces who've been here a minute, but for most of you, you're walking into a new terrain that is filled with civil wars and pitfalls and potholes. You do not want to step in the potholes or take sides in the Civil War, because you do not know where you are yet. Stay quiet. It's true. Listen. Look, observe, and listen. Get a sense of what's going on at this university, what's going on in your department, whatever it is, what's going on with your colleagues, and try to get a sense of what your role is going to be. What the priorities are in your department. What are the conflicts? What's the history of the department? Where are you coming in? And just listen a lot. Don't gossip. And this is the obvious, be nice advice. Everybody likes a nice colleague who doesn't complain all the time. Let's be that colleague. We all deal with students who turn in papers late. Your students are going to skip class. Your students are going to do things that annoy you. They're going to write you emails that start with, hey, Miss Amy, in my case. I'm working on that one, but it's going to happen. You know, you're going to have that, and the temptation is to just start venting about it all the time with your work colleagues because that's something you have in common. I encourage you not to, because the more negative you are, the more negative you become, and the more miserable your job is. Just kind of, everybody has to vent sometimes, I know. Call your grad school friends and vent to them, and then go to the office and just keep quiet, keep your head down, observe, listen, and get ready. You can take your sides later. But it's a mistake to jump in and start talking a lot. It's certainly a mistake to gossip. Don't ever do that. It's a bad idea. Yes, we all do this. Talk less. Be nice to the colleagues. Just be nice to everybody. That's sort of what I try to do. It's always a good idea. Take people for coffee, or if you're inclined, cocktails. It is very important to get to know people. A lot of times, you know, I know that Dr. Wiesenberg and others have talked about mentoring, and mentoring is really important, but you can't wait for mentoring to happen if it's not happening. I would definitely advise you to be proactive, to talk to people, to take out for coffee or cocktails your colleagues, your new colleagues, other assistant professors, because they can give you support that you need. It doesn't matter if they're in your department. You know, it's nice if they are, but it's also nice if they're not, right? You can meet new people. Take out people who are tenured faculty. Ask them if they want to go have a cup of coffee sometime and ask their advice. You know, be proactive about that. You can learn a lot from them and a lot from any advice they have to give you. It's always a good idea to ask people to give you their insight as to what they experienced, any advice they could have for how you could succeed with your research or your teaching. Anything they want to tell you can be helpful. And then make friends who are not at the university, and they can help you have perspective. Because it's easy to forget what you're really doing here. And if you get a little bit of perspective from people who aren't doing the exact same thing all the time, I think it helps us be better at our jobs. You know, a lot of times I have friends who aren't academics, and I'll say something to them about, wow, I'm just so stressed. And they'll say, well, what is it? And I'll try to explain it to them. And as I'm explaining it to them, it starts sounding really ridiculous that I'm getting that worked up about something that's kind of not that big of a deal when you get some perspective. And I'm like, oh, I'll just handle that tomorrow. It'll be fine. You know, so you have to kind of keep yourself in check. So I definitely encourage you to, it's back to the balanced life thing, to go out and enjoy yourself and make friends who can support you, but also seek out that mentoring. And don't be hesitant. Don't wait for people to come to you, but just say, you know, would you like to grab a cup of coffee or buy a cocktail for somebody and let them give you advice. Always a good plan. Number 3, here's some nuts and bolts advice. This semester, start thinking about tenure and promotion. Your pre-tenure review comes up in third year. So it's coming around very, very quickly, and it will get a lot quicker as this year goes by. Your department should have tenure and promotion guidelines for you. Get a copy of them now. And I would encourage you to, as you're having these coffee and these conversations with your senior faculty, start mapping out your plan for the next 6 years. And you don't have to be as completely crazy organized and a little detail-oriented like I am, but you could say, okay, I know I have to do this by the time I come up for tenure. This is what's expected of me in terms of publications or external funding or teaching or whatever the goals are for your department. Set your own goals. Take those goals and talk to other faculty of the department and say, does this look appropriate? Does this look like what I need to be doing? And get feedback. Then kind of back it up and say, well, okay, if I need to be there in 6 years, what do I need to be doing this year and the next year and the next year? By the 3rd year, what should I have done? By the 5th year, what should I have done? And I would actually encourage you to make a timeline for yourself and kind of think about it like that. What do I need to accomplish this 1st year, by the 2nd year, by the 3rd year? And I don't want to overwhelm you with say you must decide your 6-year plan right now, but just have it in your mind that a 6-year plan is what you're on. And that's what you should be thinking about on some level. And you could even put on your wall, like I remember putting on my wall the date that I knew I would be going for tenure, fall of this year. It was 2002, I think. But I'd be submitting my dossier. So I had to sort of think about what I needed to be doing then. And when you start getting sidetracked, to work on that PowerPoint just one more time before you go into lecture, you can see that timeline, and it'll kind of remind you of how you need to allocate your time perhaps a little bit differently. And it is a really good idea to run it by people who will be senior in your department, who will be voting on you, and just ask them, you know, if it looks like the right direction for you. Because sometimes faculty come in and they think one direction is the right direction, and then they start working on it and they realize that they're kind of going off the wrong way. Number 2, an obvious point, Dr. Wiesenberg hit on some of this right before I got up here. Remember that students are people. This is obvious, but sometimes not so obvious. You know, that they are nervous, especially if you're teaching 100 level courses or 200 level courses, even the senior level courses. Many of our students are first in their family to go to college. Many of them have no idea how to navigate the landscape of higher education. They don't know what things mean. They don't know what a professor is. They don't know what to call you. They don't know what office hours are. There's a lot of that kind of lost behavior. They will call you Miss or Mr. in your first name sometimes, or Mrs. They are trying to be respectful. For those of you not from the South, kids are raised from this high to call adults Miss Amy as a gesture of politeness. In fact, I speak to the orientation students in the summers. This past summer, I spoke to all of them, hundreds and hundreds of them coming through in different segments. And as I spoke to them, I asked them questions. They had little clickers they could answer. And one of the scenarios I gave them was, you have a professor, Ann Smith, and you want to talk to her about your class performance. So you go up to her office during office hours and you speak to her. What do you call her? And the answers were Miss Ann, Mrs. Smith, Dr. Smith, and then the fourth one was something funny like Ann Baby or something, which some smarty pants always click. And a lot of the students would put Miss Ann. And before I asked the question, I would preface it by saying, you all want to make a good impression, you want to seem like you're a serious student. And many of them would put Miss Ann. So that tells you a little bit, I think, about how they are not very well versed in the culture of higher education. And many of them don't have any idea how to study, how to prepare for tests. I asked them, how many of you never studied in high school for a test? And never did I have this entire summer fewer than 90% of the room raise their hand. So that's a problem that we don't get to fix in the sense of how they come to us, but it's a reality that we have to know. Just like all of us, I don't know about y'all, but most of us rise to the bar that's set for us when we're 10th graders or 11th graders. And that's what they've done, but the bar may not be where we would like it to be. So they get here and they do not have the writing skills, they do not have the study skills, they don't know how to take notes. You'll hear them say things like, that class isn't so bad, he doesn't give us many notes. Or, that class is tough, we get so many notes. And finally I said, what does that mean? Do they give you notes? And they would say, no, that's the notes that they put in the class. I said, well, how do they put them? That's what they write on the board, or that's what they put on the PowerPoint. And, you know, we were all probably pretty good students. These are your average students. So we have to know that that's where they're coming from, and they're just people who are doing what they've learned to do. And I'm a sociologist by training, so I see them as products, of their socialization. So you have to know that's coming and know that they need a little bit of encouragement to write down, for instance, what's not on the board. To not put too many words on the board and encourage them to take notes in a different fashion. To know that they are scared of you, that they don't know what a professor is, but you seem pretty important and pretty scary, so they don't know that they should come by your office hours. They'll say to me, a student who's failing, I'll say, well, why did you never come to my office hours to see me? I had 150 students that semester, no one ever came. And they'll say, well, gosh, we have so many students, I figured you didn't have time to see me. Like, well, apparently everybody else thought that because no one came. So you have to tell them, I want you to come see me, and then sit down and talk to them and ask them questions about how they take notes and what they need to do, and just be nice to them. I did a survey once of students where I asked them to rate the qualities in a professor that they thought were most important to being a good professor, and it was a list of like 15 to 20 different things. And do you know what comes out number one every time I ever did that? Caring about students. You can be hard, you can be demanding, you can be very heavy in the rules, or you can be super easygoing. The thing that will make them either commit and get engaged or not is whether they think you want them to succeed. So if you go in there and you tell them, look, like this is what I do when I teach. I say, look, y'all are all grown-ups, which they don't think they are, by the way. You are all grown-ups. You're responsible for your own education, and I really, really hope that everyone in here knocks the ball out of the park. I want you all to really love this class and really get into it and really, really earn high grades. That helps a lot, I've found, just saying those words to them. So just kind of keep in mind that they're people, and they're people who are somehow simultaneously hypersensitive and overconfident. This is the generation we call emerging adults. If any of you are curious about that literature, it's fascinating stuff. They're all very optimistic about their futures. They don't know what they're going to do, but they're sure they're going to be great at it. That is what the surveys very consistently show. They are optimistic people who have a very hard time setting goals. And it's no wonder. It's no wonder. These kids were born 1990s. They have had someone holding their hand and making decisions and overscheduling everything they've ever done, most of them. You'll get parents calling you. They're not used to scheduling their time. They're not used to setting goals, and they're not used to studying. This is the generation that as a society, we've created. So that's who you're dealing with. And that's, some of them are still going to get A's, some of them are going to struggle. But if you keep in mind that's where they're coming from, and they really want to do well, and they want to impress you, they just don't know how. So you have to be a little bit generous and patient, very patient. And it's rewarding. I love teaching here, and I love our students, and it really is a different population than you might get at some other schools. I don't know where you come from, but I taught at Michigan a little bit before I came here, and boy, big change. And I really like working with our students because there's something transformative about education for them in a way that it may not be at all schools. And as they come into their own sense of being a grown-up and making own decisions, it's really fun and exciting to work with them. It's another question I asked them this summer was, how many of y'all believe that you are an adult? And in a room of 100 students, and then all their parents, which I segregated actually, made them go sit somewhere else, but in a room with all the students, I'd have maybe one person raise their hand. Interesting. And your final tip is what everyone in here should know. Whoops. Your department secretary is your new best friend. No matter what mood you're in, I don't know if there's any department secretaries in here, but no matter what mood you're in, no matter what has gone on, the department secretary did not mess up, and you are grateful because that is your most powerful ally in the department. I'm not playing. They handle all the paperwork, all the logistics. They know every rule on this campus, and there are a lot of them. How do you file travel paperwork? How do you get permission to do this? Where does this happen? How do you change a grade? They can answer that, and you do not want to tick them off. Have respect for what they do. Go to them for advice. Buy them things on Administrative Assistance Day. It's on the calendar. Take them to coffee. When you go to Starbucks, pick up 2. I'm telling you, it will definitely pay off. And, you can learn so much from any administrative assistant on this campus, and we tend to forget that. I think too many faculty come in and kind of don't know this piece, even though you know it. But if you have not started already, go thank your administrative assistant in the department today and continue forming that relationship as time goes on. So, I'm not sure what time it is because I don't have my watch, but okay, well, I'll take a couple of questions, so if we have just a couple of minutes. If anybody wants to ask anything about anything. Yes?
It's very difficult to be very detailed on a syllabus in a class you've never taught before.
Yes.
I can't outline something. I can't read the future. I like being flexible. I hate
Yes.
this is what we're doing this week. I want to be able to walk in and lecture on something perhaps I didn't even tell them about because something happened in the news that's relevant to our class.
Absolutely, and it is a trick. That balance of structure and flexibility is important because if you get too rigid, then it makes the class boring. If you have too much in there, I know that. So I try to build in, it depends on a new class, it's trickier. You can have a week with a topic, but make it a little bit more vague. But it's most important that you're specific about things like how many tests what will there be, and what format will they be in, and how much will they write, things like that. If you get those nuts and bolts down, then you can be a little bit flexible with the schedule of topics. And what I do sometimes, honestly, is if I have, let's say, an upper division class I've never taught before, which is happening in spring, so I'll have a topic like, let's say, healthcare provision or something, and then I'll have on there additional readings on Blackboard. And I don't know what they are yet, but I don't put them on there. I just put additional readings. And so then if something happens in the news, I can put that on Blackboard. right? And they can read that, and when it comes down to that time in the blackboard, it opens up that section, they'll see what those readings are. So you can kind of build in both, and that gives you some room for flexibility. Or you can go into class one day and say, I'd planned to talk about this, but this just happened, and I think we should address that because it's really relevant to what we're doing. You could also require things. I know some professors who require them to read a newspaper every day. And then that gives you something to talk about. So there's ways to build it in, but I would really encourage you to commit to things like tests and papers, not necessarily specific due dates if you just can't, but at least how much they have to do of each thing and what the format of the test would be like, just to reduce their anxiety and also to protect you, because that's where you start getting into problems. If you have a student who doesn't do well and feels they were misled about what the expectations were. So I would definitely hammer down, it'll be 4 tests and it'll be this much writing. Because if they think there's 5 pages and it turns out to be 20, you're going to have problems. Not the other way, but that's usually not the way it goes. So tighten up at least some of it as much as you can, but you could keep the topics a little bit looser if you need to, would be my advice. Talk to your department chair too. Yes?
So what is the preferred application of that we should be asked to follow? I mean, you put it on the board the first day.
It is a tricky thing because I don't like to tell people what to call me. That seems so awkward, but then I'm realizing they don't know. So I try to do it in subtle ways where I would sign my email. I'll take doctor or professor, either one from a student. But there are some, it depends on your pedagogical philosophy too. Some professors prefer to be called by a first name. It's part of what they want to do in the classroom. And that's totally fine too. But what I would do in that case would be to make it a point where it's kind of a teaching moment where you say, look, almost all your professors, you can go ahead and assume they have PhDs, because that's most of the time the case. And it's always a good idea to start with doctor last name, because that shows that you understand academic culture. But I would prefer you just go ahead and call me by the first name. And that way you're kind of letting them know where you stand, but also teaching them a little bit so they don't offend other faculty by going in their classroom and calling them Bob. You know what I mean? So a lot of times when students do things, I can kind of turn it and try to make it something where they learn about academic culture, because I see that as part of our job too, is professionalizing the students so that when they graduate and go to grad school or get a job, they can be okay and know how to play the game and show respect to people, whatever that may be. That's a great question. I just put my name on the syllabus, but then usually students start calling me something, and I'm not going to sit there and call them out in a class of 144 and say, that's doctor, because then you become the bad guy. But it's a little tricky. I'll sign the emails doctor. That doesn't always work either, though. Then they write back, hey, Miss Amy, thanks. You're welcome. It's a slow process. One more question? Well, I put my contact information up there, so even if you're not in arts and letters, you can still contact me anytime. I'm happy to help. My main job in the dean's office is dealing with undergraduate student issues. But if you just don't know who to call about something, you can call me and I'll try to figure out, or if I can't answer your question, who can. And you'll find, I think Southern Miss is a very warm, welcoming, friendly campus, and everyone here will be happy to help you. I really believe that. So I'd encourage you all to reach out and ask questions whenever you need to, and don't hesitate to contact me. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today.